Hey YouTube, and welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry. And today we're going to be finishing up the D-Day series by Extra History. So this is the final episode, 4 out of 4. I've really enjoyed learning about a little bit more about some of the D-Day stuff. I really liked the last one about the French Resistance and some of the other things that were going on inside of France during D-Day, which doesn't get talked about a lot. And it looks like here, probably just the last part of it, so what actually ends up happening after the landings, and then what the German response is going to be. So we'll go ahead and get this going. All right, like I promoted in the first 3 videos, make sure if you have not, visit the link down below to this original video that I'm checking out from Extra History, and give them a like and subscribe, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, let's do this. So this is episode 4, D-Day, the Atlantic Wall. All right, let's check this out.
June 6th, 1944 is a day that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel has been looking forward to for a long time. His wife's birthday. With bad weather making an invasion impossible and intelligence suggesting that Eisenhower's waiting for more troops, the commander of Normandy's defenses has decided to go home and surprise his wife with a pair of Parisian shoes. In the middle of the night, his phone rings.
Bad news.
The invasion's begun. This episode is sponsored by Wargaming. New players can download World of Tanks and use the code NEPTUNE for free goodies. Link in the description. The Nazi leadership had begun preparing for D-Day even before the Allies held their conference at Tehran, following a British commando raid at Saint-Nazaire and the landings at Dieppe in 1942. Hitler had realized that even if an invasion lay years off, the Allies were already capable of hitting ports in occupied France. His solution was the Atlantic Wall, a line of coastal defenses that originally clustered around ports, but eventually stretched from the Spanish border to Norway.
Pretty remarkable what they were able to do defensively with this, especially when you don't know exactly what the points of entry are going to be. And we've seen the Nazis didn't know. I mean, Hitler thought it'd be at Calais, just up a little further east, at the shortest point in the English Channel. And if you saw some of the deceptive techniques from episode 2, I believe, that's also something the Allies wanted them to think too, by setting up phony armies and just phony signals of many different kinds to try to think it's going to be at a different place, when really, of course, it's going to be in Normandy. But pretty impressive what they had to do to prevent this when you don't know at all. And if we're going by this map, I mean, look, it's basically the entire European coast that way. That's controlled by Germany.
Rather than building a continuous defensive barrier, German engineers drafted 1 million forced laborers from France to create a string of machine gun and artillery positions. These hardpoints had overlapping fields of fire, with artillery intended to fire along the length of the beach rather than out to sea. This allowed the German army to cover a larger amount of territory with fewer men, a consideration that was crucially important by 1944. In late 1943, Hitler had appointed Rommel as overall commander of forces in northern France. It was a political as well as practical appointment, leveraging Germany's most famous general in order to reassure the troops and the public. Rommel also had a personal relationship with Hitler, which allowed him to operate semi-autonomously outside the chain of command. When Rommel arrived, which allowed him to the troops and the public. Rommel also had a personal relationship with Hitler, which allowed him to operate semi-autonomously outside the chain of command. When Rommel arrived, he was shocked at the state of the Atlantic Wall. Command had stripped troops for the Eastern Front, and many of the men were either new recruits, conscripts from Eastern Europe, or had gone soft garrisoning the wine-soaked towns of France. Allied bombing had nullified the Luftwaffe. Rommel went to work.
All right, so looks like Rommel's down here to crack the whip and to get these people in shape. You know, Rommel is often considered one of the greatest generals in especially in World War II history. Getting a lot of respect even from Allied sympathizers, especially these days when people talk about it. And a lot of people like to try to separate Rommel from Hitler a bit, and then he's working for them, but I mean he's a general first and foremost, and like a Nazi second. That's kind of the thing that I hear from a lot of people that really study World War II. So interesting there.
He sent veteran units to supplement the poorly trained divisions. He seeded the ground around the defensive emplacements with mines that jumped into the air before exploding. At low tide, he sank a forest of wooden stakes tipped with anti-tank mines that sat just below the waves. Now, any invader would have to choose between running the gauntlet at high tide or landing at low tide and crossing 300 yards of open beach.
Yeah.
He also flooded the low country, erected poles to tear apart gliders, and stationed troops inland to slow the Allied...
I mean, look at that. Holy cow. You know, you see all those famous scenes from films and stuff about the storming of the beaches of Normandy, and you had this gauntlet maze of treacherous things that led to such high casualties in those hours leading up to they could finally take the base. And how crappy that would have been to be in that first wave of people that you're lucky just to get to the shore because of the shelling and look at, I mean, the stuff that's put into place in the water before you'd even get there, before you have cliffs of artillery fire and other different obstacles to get through there. Quite the task, right? Especially when you're already doing the biggest amphibious invasion in history.
advance in preparation for a counterattack. But planning around that counterattack was a problem. First of all, they didn't know exactly where the Allies would land. Luckily, German intelligence pulled off a coup. They successfully deployed multiple agents in England. Soon, they were receiving reports of armies marshalling to attack Pas-de-Calais, along with diversionary attacks in occupied Norway and... what was...
Wow. The spies are taking the bait. Norway, it's a diversion, and that's kind of been talked about how even when the Normandy invasion was happening, I know with Hitler was still saying like, no, that is not going to be the big one. That's a diversion to take us away from Calais, because Calais is going to be where it's going to be, and holding strong there, which ended up leaving Normandy less defended. So is that what's happening here? It's like they're even fooling the spies that way. Is this how good the information was kept under wraps in the deceptive efforts? Let's go back.
Agents in England. Soon, they were receiving reports of armies marshalling to attack Pas-de-Calais, along with diversionary attacks in occupied Norway and... what was the other one? Normandy? Whatever. And aerial reconnaissance confirmed forces massing for these attacks. Of course, every single one of those German agents was actually working for the British. Good work, Darvo. Regardless of where the landings took place, Rommel believed the battle would be decided on the beaches. Should the Allies establish a beachhead, it would be over. In his plan, the divisions defending the coast would slow the enemy down in preparation for a decisive counterattack. As a result, he wanted the Panzer Reserve under his own command, close to the shore in order to sweep the Allies back into the sea. However, Hitler's leadership style started to affect strategy. From his early days in the Nazi Party, Hitler had promoted a kind of social Darwinism among his staff, giving them overlapping responsibilities and intentionally fostering feuds and competition. This meant that subordinates couldn't amass enough power to challenge him, and it elevated his position as the final arbiter of any dispute.
Sure. I mean, it's been talked about how his rise to power and how he was able to consolidate power. And you see a lot of these... yeah, the structure is designed to... It almost looks like give the illusion that powers are delegated and stuff like that, when that's really not the case at all. In fact, it's the opposite, which is pretty brilliant strategy for consolidation of power. And you see that. In
this case, Rommel was opposed by officers, including the elder arbiter of any dispute. In this case, Rommel was opposed by officers, including the elderly Eastern Front veteran von Rundstedt, who wanted the tank reserves held near Paris. This would keep them flexible, in case the Allies landed somewhere unexpected, and shield them from shore bombardment. Rommel countered that the long drive toward the coast would make them vulnerable to air attacks. After fierce debate, they put it to the Führer, who, ever indecisive, created an unworkable compromise.
What?
He broke up the reserve, giving Rommel 3 panzer divisions and keeping the larger reserve around Paris as a personal unit, which couldn't be moved without his express permission. Only one of Rommel's divisions, the 21st Panzer, was sent to Normandy.
Good luck.
So the stage is set for June 5th, and the weather could not be uglier. With conditions so poor for both sailing and flying, senior officers relax in the knowledge that the Allies will not arrive anytime soon. Many take the opportunity to rush home on leave. And that is when paratroopers start to land. At 5:30 a.m. on June 6th, German soldiers peer out of their bunkers to see shapes in the morning mist, ships stretching from horizon to horizon. Then, aircraft engines. A massive Allied bombardment rocks the ground as bombs, naval shells, and rockets pound French soil. But the bombers drop too far inland. The rockets fall short. Naval guns make little headway against the steel-reinforced bunkers. 1,745 tons of ordnance drop on Omaha Beach without killing a single German.
Dang.
But the roads inland are wrecked. Worse, Allied paratrooper and glider units land between the static units and the reserve, with resistance elements destroying crucial bridges and rail lines, meaning that reinforcements and supplies can't get through.
Right.
Landing craft begin to plunge
Last
toward
video,
the
see
shore.
last video if you
On
haven't
Omaha Beach,
seen
the
it.
Germans see the first Allied soldiers trudging in the surf. Machine guns open fire. Far away, Allied soldiers lie face down, pinned, as the first wave of mortars and artillery shells fling bodies into the air. Months of preparation mean that German artillery crews have ranged out the beaches and know exactly where to drop their ordnance. The initial slaughter is monumentally
Right.
one-sided. One American company at Omaha takes 92% casualties.
That's nuts. Check that out. Being in that first wave, you're gonna die. That's what happened, and statistics definitely show that that's gonna happen there. It makes it amazing to know that this will end up being a success based on how difficult it was. I mean, maybe just the numbers end up overwhelming things. So.
By 1:30 that afternoon, German observers at Omaha report that small groups of Americans have broken through, but the defense is holding. They're pushing the Allies back into the sea. But Omaha is the exception. Despite fierce resistance, the British have broken through at Sword and Gold, and the Canadians at Juneau. The botched American landing at Utah has reorganized into a chaotic opportunity. Here, the bombardments have had more effect, and the terrain isn't as challenging, but men still die in droves. The chaos on the beach is mirrored at every German headquarters between Normandy and Hitler's vacation home at Berchtesgaden. Generals argue over whether to commit reserves and where. Rommel is rushing toward the battle in a staff car, unable to issue orders. His rival, von Rundstedt, quickly orders the 21st Panzer to meet the British advancing on Caen, and issues orders for the reserve units near Paris to move out. But his orders are countermanded. That unit can only be moved by the Führer's personal order, and Hitler is asleep. Ever since his days as a bohemian in Vienna, Hitler has always been a late riser. Rigid procedure dictates that the Führer should not be woken unnecessarily, and even in the face of invasion, no one wants to break this protocol. After all, what if it's only a diversion? When Hitler eventually wakes at noon, he is thrilled the invasion has arrived. This, he says, is his chance to decisively crush the Allies. And yet, he delays. It's 4 p.m.
Does it show the intimidation that he had? That these people were they felt like they were too frightened to potentially disturb Hitler, right? Even in the face of invasion, you think, a general would say, that's worthy of waking me up. You know what I mean? To get that, especially if there are so many things that require your direct permission, that things have not been delegated. It's that illusion of delegating things. That's probably pretty telling about himself as a leader and how he's perceived by people.
Before he orders the Panzer Reserve to move out. By that time, the clouds have cleared, exposing the column to Allied air power. So instead of advancing, the unit ends up hiding in the woods until dusk. It will take them 2 days and a night to join the battle. As the Allies overwhelm German defenses and march inland, Hitler spends his day ordering V-1 revenge strikes not on Normandy but on London, then holds a conference with minor functionaries.
That's not going to have any effect.
When Goebbels shows him the Normandy landings on a map, Hitler exclaims with delight, "Just where we expected them." Goebbels, who has heard Hitler rant for months about how the Allied target would be Calais, simply nods at the Führer's historical revisionism. After all, Hitler is somewhat right, in a way. They all knew that a diversionary landing would happen at Normandy. Probably best to keep the strong units in Calais. Meanwhile, the Atlantic Wall is crumbling. Even at Omaha, the defense has degraded. Ammunition is running out. Artillery emplacements fall silent. Americans begin breaking through and enveloping the casements. At Caen, the Germans see one last opportunity, a gap between the Canadian and British lines. A grenadier regiment rushes to exploit it, and by 8 p.m. radios that they're on the beach. With armored support, they can hold. But the Allies have gotten wise. When the 21st Panzer tries to follow, they find themselves running a gauntlet. Fire pours in from both sides. Every minute, another tank explodes.
Jeez.
Seeing
There's
that
not
the
enough.
window of opportunity has closed, their commander orders them to halt and dig in around Caen. But the defense is stiffening.
Didn't
All
have
along
enough,
the
right?
battlefront,
Because then weren't they saying that would they send 3 divisions out there when there was a lot more potentially available that were used just personally in Paris? It's like you want to. I mean, you'd think you'd want to. You put these divisions into a place where they can see more of that to stop an initial invasion, to stop initial conflict, to do that. So these divisions put out there for Rommel's, they have no chance, really. I mean, they have no chance. I don't know if they thought maybe too much faith in the Atlantic Wall, although it was good for a bit, but I mean, it was overpowered. So maybe that shows that.
Allied units begin failing their first day objectives of advancing and linking up inland. By dusk, the Allies have scattered beachheads, but not much more. Within days, German reinforcements will arrive, and the hedgerows of Normandy will become a killing field that will dwarf the casualties of the landings.
Sure.
D-Day is over, but Operation Overlord could still fail. To win, the Allies are going to have to push just as hard on D-Day +1, and
Sure.
D-Day +2, and every day after that. For
That's
all
just,
of
I mean, landing successfully, it's good, but that's not the point of the mission, right? And doesn't even necessarily ensure success for the time. You've got to push inland. You've got to do that, right? You got to take the command centers. You got to take places like Paris and Caen. There, so you have to get the real hard part originally is to get those beach landings, because then you got to use that to get another set of troops. And again, I think they end up getting about 1 million landing successfully, about 1 million over the month or so, starting in June, then into July, which is going to be a success.
these forces, American, British Commonwealth, French, German, and Soviet, the fight would continue for 11 murderous months. But the Allies now had a beachhead, and in trying to throw them back, Germany would spend more men, fuel, and equipment that they could ill afford. Allied victory is a long way off, but for the first time, it's in sight.
All right. Okay. So the Atlantic Wall. Good to learn more about that. About it, if you didn't know exactly what did the Allies see on those beachheads, which again becomes pretty famous in movies, video games, where you hear that happening there. But I mean, overall, it looks like the deceptive methods and the strategy is going to work when you look at the big picture, right? You saw in the first 2-3 episodes now them going and talking about those things, like for example, not giving away the Normandy position at least completely, because the Germans still thought that it could be at other places. I mean, there was definitely things, it looks like, from the German side that could have happened, that they could have done to help prevent this, but of course that's really hard to do when you don't have information, or have bad information, like they said they got from these supposed spies, right? That information ends up being bad, that they have to use for. Plus some of the things just installed in their kind of command structure with Hitler, and then Hitler's nature itself. But I guess a question we could ask ourselves, we could talk about, is even if the Germans had, if they had been able to be better prepared, would the D-Day invasion have still succeeded, or do you think it would have failed? I guess we can get talking about that in a discussion down below. Do you think it could have been stopped? Right, knowing what you do know about it, I'm not even sure exactly. I got to look into more of what could have happened a little bit more, like what could have potentially been more available. But I think it is something, yeah, that's worth thinking about. But I mean, it doesn't matter what happened. What happened is what happened. But interesting to think about if it was possible that this could have been a failure, right? I mean, we know the Allies weren't necessarily sure that this would succeed, as you see with Eisenhower's even doubts and his kind of plan B and responses ready for if it had failed, like this letter he drafted for the like press release, if it hadn't succeeded. But one thing that's true though is that it had to succeed. It had to succeed. If it didn't, I mean, maybe there'd be a D-Day 2 at some point, but you don't know what the outcome of the Western Front war would have been. If this had failed, would this have just simply continued to be what it was, which at this point was the Germans versus the Russians, and the Russians were starting to have success at great cost, of course. So with that as well, so even another question would be is if D-Day had never even been attempted, would this have been a long-term success for the Germans? Because I think a lot of people say it even without the Western intervention, that it still would have ended up being a failure for the Germans, because the Russians, although it would have been at an even greater cost, would have eventually succeeded anyways, and Germany would have imploded that way. But interesting to think about there. All right, well, hopefully you liked the video. Hopefully I was able to add some things. I was just learning a lot of things with that. So, I mean, I'm not out to criticize videos or tell them where they're wrong, and I don't get that feeling at all from these guys. These guys are awesome. They provide great stories and stuff. I'm here to learn. Hopefully you are too, and that's why we can do this kind of together here. But if you did like it, make sure you go down, give them a like and subscribe. That's awesome. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd love to have you around too, to be a part of my little community and continue to appreciate history and of course learn more and more about it. I do this so I can just further my hobby of history, but especially become even better to better myself as a teacher as well. So thank you for that. All right, a few plugs on the way out. This series was voted on by Patreon members, so if you'd like to join our Patreon, you can do so. There's a link down below to the Patreon. Also join our Discord server if you'd like to be a part of a more direct history kind of discussion group, and we got a lot of people over there that are very knowledgeable and willing to talk about any historical topic from anything, and that'd be great too. But all right, but thanks for being here and supporting the video and supporting the channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye.